All right, so new leadership in the House, a divided Congress. What do the midterm elections and especially the Fed's latest moves mean for this nation's economic recovery? And also, of course, our ballooning debt. David Walker is the former U.S. Comptroller General and also the founder of the new Comeback America initiative and joins us now. Thanks for being here. What about the Fed's latest move, QE2? It will be $900 billion to stimulate or try to stimulate this economy. Bernanke outlining it in an op-ed in the Washington Post. What are the longer-term budget deficit implications here?
Well, it's not a deficit. It's short-term gain to try to prop up the economy, to try to keep rates low, to try to stimulate demand, but long-term risk. The fact is...
Was it the wrong move?
Well, we'll see, all right? I think it's a risky move. It's one that is designed to try to stimulate the economy, but both our fiscal policies, which is tax and spending, and our monetary policies, which is the Fed, they're inflationary over time.
I was just going to ask you that. Are you one of those in the camp that say now, because of the Fed's latest actions, we really do risk runaway inflation?
There is a risk over time. We don't have a problem in the short term because global demand is still weak. We have very high unemployment. And as a result, we don't have great competition for capital right now. And as a result, it's not a problem in the short term. But do not misunderstand. The United States will never default, but there is a serious risk of inflation and a significant decline in the value of the dollar if we don't get our fiscal and monetary policy.
But how do you explain that risk and the significance of it to the average American family right now that either has one or two parents out of work, struggling to get by, falling deeper into debt? Why do they care about that now? Why should they? Because that message has to get across.
Sure. We have to care about both today and tomorrow, all right? We need to do what it takes to try to be able to make sure that we don't have a double-dip recession. We need to be able to get unemployment down. That could even mean that short-term deficits go up somewhat. As long as we properly design them and effectively implement them, that's okay. But we have to have a plan as to what we're going to do with regard to our structural deficits. We have to start implementing that plan in phases over a number of years in order to avoid a crisis of confidence that could end up causing something much worse than a recession.
Do we see that compromise in Washington? I mean, will they work it out? Will they come forth with, as you said, a 2011 budget and get this fiscal house in order? Will there be more bickering because you have very, very opposing views?
We'll know very quickly. First, in the lame duck session, they ought to do several things. First, they ought to pass a budget. We don't have a budget. We ought to freeze discretionary spending at a minimum across the board. We ought to not allow across-the-board pay increases for the military or civilian employees right now. We should, in addition to that, we should have a temporary ban on earmarks. We need to start doing some things that are substantive, and then we need to start developing a plan to deal with our structural deficits that we can start implementing next year.
One of the critical issues that hasn't been decided yet, but will be likely in the next few months, what to do with the Bush tax cuts, to extend them, to not extend them, and for whom. It's interesting, you even look at someone like David Stockman, former budget director for President Reagan, Alan Greenspan. They've really turned the corner when it comes to tax cuts and said, look, you can't afford them at this point in time.
Here's my view, and that's the third thing that they ought to deal with in the lame duck session. They should not extend the tax cuts for the well-off. For middle-income Americans, we can extend it for 1 to 2 years, but we ought to pay for it with spending reductions. We might want to make the R&D tax credit permanent, but we ought to pay for it with spending reductions. If we extend any of the middle-class tax cuts, it should only be for 1 to 2 years, because we need comprehensive tax reform.
Just to get us out of this?
We need comprehensive tax reform. Look, we're spending over $1 trillion more than we're taking in. We've got trillion-dollar deficits as far as the eye can see. You can't do that forever without a day of reckoning.
In general, do Americans need to be taxed more? Because if we were living in the UK right now, we'd be paying a lot more in taxes. Yeah. Of course, we'd have national health care and other services, but are Americans complaining too much for being taxed less than a lot of other people around the globe?
Look, in my view is you need to have a plan. The plan has to pass a basic math test. And when you look at the situation that we're in right now, it's primarily a spending problem. I think it's 3 parts: reforming social insurance programs to keep them solvent, sustainable, secure, and a sound safety net, as well as spending cuts and constraints. And it's 1 part tax reform and tax increases. So 3 to 1. Spending cuts and constraint to tax increases. But yes, we're going to have more taxes over time because government has grown too big, promised too much, and waited too long to deal with the problem.
If you had President Obama and soon-to-be House Speaker John Boehner in a room together, what would your advice be to them?
You need to work together for the good of our country and for the good of the American people. We cannot afford to have a stalemate for the next 2 years. Our fiscal time bomb is ticking. Our foreign lenders are losing patience. The Chinese leader is now rated the most influential person in the world, and the Chinese believe that our best days are behind us. We must prove them wrong.